In 2011, this administration created the Equity and Excellence Commission. This is Chakrafata, who's on that group, and the group was supposed to recommend ways in which federal policies could address funding disparities in education. And he said states would have to quantify disparities that exist today and thereby confess their sins. So the fact that we have an unequal distribution of money is a sin for the states, and we need to confess that and change it. This is about income redistribution. That group created a report called For Each and Every Child, and in that they said we present a bold new vision for the federal role in education. The time has come for the federal government to redesign and reform the funding of our nation's public schools. That certainly there will still be a role for the local school boards, but it should operate within a clearer, stronger framework that aligns local decisions with state policies and with national commitments to equity and excellence. Keeping in mind that the national commitments to equity and excellence came only from this committee, this commission that was formed. There was no national debate, there was no vote taken, just this committee decided we should have equity, meaning an equal distribution of resources for education. Again, federal law, this is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, also known as No Child Left Behind now, said no funds provided under this act shall be used to develop, pilot test, field test, implement, or administer any federally sponsored national test in reading, mathematics, or any other subject. Oh, missing a slide. But in fact, we have already spent, the federal government alone has spent $350 million developing the tests that are being used to align the Common Core. The states have not paid a dime, and it's been 100% funded by the federal government. So we've decided, apparently, that the law doesn't really mean anything. Here in the state, the law says, this is Missouri statute, that the State Board of Education shall develop written curricular frameworks that may be used by the local districts. The framework shall incorporate various performance standards. They shall provide guidance to the school district, but shall not be mandates for local school boards in the adoption or the development of written curricula. How many school boards now think that they have to implement Common Core? State statute says, no, this is a local decision. We're going to provide for curricular frameworks, but it's your choice as a district. We're changing, as he said, we're going to change the attitudes and the normal ways of doing things, and we're moving away from local control. These are members of our State Board of Education. Mike Jones is the vice president of the board, and at the meeting last month, talking about the school transfer issue, he said the tradition of education as a local responsibility is no longer totally true. We are managing the process, and we are a player in that process. So the state is now a player in your local education. And John Martin said, when governance won't cooperate, there needs to be a hammer big enough to require cooperation. So now the state believes that they need to develop hammers to force the local districts to do what the state wants them to do. This is a massive change in education. How did they get us to agree to these changes? Well, they created a crisis. They said, America, middle of the pack in these international tests. We are falling behind other countries. If you look at China, they are the leading of the pack in these international tests, and we're behind India even in terms of our performance on these tests. But is there really a crisis? Because that's what they said. We need Common Core standards to make our children more competitive in the global economy. That's why we're looking at these international tests. But if you look at the World Economic Forum, they do a global competitive index where they rank countries in terms of their global competitiveness. The U.S. is usually in the top 5, if not the top 1 or 2. And in fact, when the WEF says that we've dropped in the rankings, they never mention education as the reason that our ranking has dropped. Typically what they say is it's due to stupid economic decisions, like weak corporate auditing and reporting standards, suspect corporate ethics, big deficits brought on by Wall Street's financial implosion, that's QE7, wherever they're on right now, and unsustainable levels of debt. This is what improves our country's economics, not our education. And as proof of this, let's look at some economic indicators. The Nikkei, kind of the Japanese version of the Dow Jones, in a 20-year period from '89 to 2010, their points went from 38,000 to 9,500. They dropped about 75% of their points. In those 20 years, they were in the top 10 of the countries on the TIMSS test. So if education was great, then they should have maybe gone down in the TIMSS. Dow Jones in the same period went from 2,750 to 11,000 points, a 4-fold increase. Now the United States moved from 20 out of 34 countries to 11, so we moved up a little bit, but certainly not a 4 times increase. So there doesn't seem to be that connect between performance on these international tests, standardized tests, and the economy. This is a PISA, Program for International Student Assessment. It's given to 15-year-olds. Poverty explains 46% of the PISA results. The U.S. has one of the highest childhood poverty rates of any of the industrialized countries. And when you disaggregate the data and account for the poverty rates, the United States scores in the top of all PISA tests. PISA does not measure resilience, persistence, collaboration, cooperation, cultural awareness, all the things that we say we want our kids to have and that the big Common Core is going to do. So PISA is not the reason, and actually this is what PISA vendors say about PISA. It does not evaluate how good your curricular choices are. It measures knowledge and skills for life, but doesn't have a strong curricular focus. And in fact, the OECD, which is the group that delivers the PISA test, says policymakers should not use the results either to indict or commend education systems. They should not use the results to make important policy decisions. So why are we saying, oh my gosh, we have to change everything because we're in the middle of the path on the PISA? Countries that are above us, Estonia, Hungary, Slovenia, Vietnam, why isn't their gross domestic product higher than ours? Only 10% of Chinese engineering graduates and 25% of Indian graduates are prepared to work in multinational corporations or corporations outside their home countries. Compare that with 81% of U.S. engineers who graduate. And the U.S. produces the largest number of utility patents, otherwise known as innovation patents, and this is from the U.S. Patent and Trade Office. Compared, that's 100,000 a year for the last 45 years, greater than all of the other countries. No other country comes close. So was America really in this panic? Well, if it wasn't America, it was Missouri. Maybe Missouri's been in a crisis. This is the governor in February of 2009, and he's elected in the fall of 2008, so he's brand new in office, just came in January. He was doing an interview with C-SPAN, and they asked him a question about education in the state.
You told the New York Times in a piece this morning that you want to use some of the money for education. What role do you think the federal government should have in education compared to the state and local governments?
Well, clearly it's a state and local responsibility. In Missouri, we have a proud tradition of local control when it comes to K through 12. We have an outstanding public education system that provides opportunities for kids and adults going to school. There's primarily a state responsibility, no doubt about it.
He recognizes it's a state issue, and he says, we have an outstanding education system in this state. And in fact, Kristen Castro, who was brought in as the Commissioner of Education a few months later in July of that same year, when she was doing her acceptance speech, she said the vast majority of Missouri schools have made tremendous progress towards reaching the standards, including addressing the needs of our underserved population. We have approximately 7% who are at risk because of where they live. These students live in urban centers and extreme rural areas that are characterized by high concentration of poverty. So once again, she didn't say that these students are suffering in our urban districts because we have such poor standards. They're suffering, their scores are suffering because they live in extreme poverty. It also means, a corollary of that is that 93% of our schools in 2009 were making adequate yearly progress. Here's the U.S. Secretary of Education, Margaret Spelling's meeting in 2008, just a year before, with the Missouri State Board of Education. This is what she had to say about Missouri standards.
You all have led on some very key and important things, and I know there are some issues that you're still working on. You may be struggling with one with others, but I'm really proud of the fact that you have had your standards are so high. I mean, Massachusetts gets a lot of airtime about their high standards, but I think a little known fact is that Missouri are right up there and very, very strong.
Standards are right up there close to Massachusetts, who's been at the top of the NAEP test for the last 10 years. So it wasn't the standards, at least not according to the U.S. Secretary of Education. And now here's Governor Nixon, 4 months after that interview with C-SPAN, saying he signed a commitment to Missouri to join with the other states in adopting the Common Core standards. And at the time he signed it in June, we did not have the Commissioner of Education, and Castro was not yet on board. So even though the document was supposed to be signed by your highest education officer in the state, we didn't have one. But he went ahead and signed it anyway. He said it was too important. It was so important to warrant taking this initial step and signing on in my capacity as governor. He signed it alone 4 months later. At the time, these are our NAEP scores. That's the National Assessment of Education Progress. This is a standardized test that is given to a select group of students. And by select, I mean they are randomly selected in 4th and 8th grade to take the test. And it measures math and reading scores and literacy. It started in 1992, and as you can see, in 92 we had a score of 220. and 33 people down here in the lowest performing level. In 2009, right about when he signed us on, we were at our highest NAEP score ever, 224. Once we signed on to Common Core and some districts started implementing it, our NAEP scores started dropping again. This is the 8th grade math results, same sort of thing here. In 1992, they were 271. We reached our highest point in 2009, they were at 286, and they started dropping again. And the rise has not been the same. Our goal in the state, we have a 10 by 20 plan, which means we want to be the top 10, one of the top 10 states by the year 2020. And one of those goals was to make sure that our NAEP scores increase 1 point every year. Well, we've already dropped 4 points, so we got to make up those 4 points and move ahead. We had, the national average was to increase 1 point per year. Since Common Core has been introduced, the national average has dropped to increase of 0.3 per year. So we are slowing our progress nationally. So why did Nixon sign the MOU? Well, because there was money on the line. The American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, the U.S. Department of Education was given $53 billion. They were to use this to help the states at the time. Remember, this was 2008. Everybody's economy was struggling. Everybody's budgets were hurting, especially in education, so they gave money to the governors. They could apply for the state fiscal stabilization funds. They could do this in exchange for a commitment to advance some essential education reforms. So Missouri applied for the money, the governor applied for the money, and we got $1.7 billion in state fiscal stabilization funds. This is money the governor spends. This does not get allotted to the legislature. They have no say over where this money is spent or how it is spent. And we don't yet have an accounting of where the $1.7 billion has been spent. So what were those 4 assurances that they were required to sign on to in order to get that money? Well, number one, they had to make progress towards implementing college and career-ready standards with aligned assessments. They had to establish and use pre-K through college career data systems to track progress and foster continuous improvement, increase teacher effectiveness, address inequities in distribution of highly qualified teachers, and develop a turnaround model for failing schools. So I'm going to look a little bit at the standards, the number one assurance there, develop college and career-ready standards. DESE says that the standards, the group that came together, was a diverse group of teachers, content experts, parents, and school administrators, including some of Missouri's best and brightest leaders. They worked together to create the standards. That's what the press release that DESE put out said. Here's a press release that the NGA, the National Governors Association, put out. They said the Standards Development Work Group was composed of content experts from Achieving, ACT, and the College Board. So those two things don't really match. And in fact, here were the breakouts of the different work groups. The math work group had 5 members of Achieve staff, 4 members from the SAT, 3 members from the ACT, one retired math teacher, a college math professor who has dual duty because he was also an Achieve Inc. consultant, and a standards test development expert. On the English side, we had 4 ACT members, 3 college board, 4 Achieve staff, a retired college professor, a marketing specialist, and a writing specialist. Do you see any parents, teachers, active classroom K-12 teachers in that list? No. So where were those people that DESE must have been writing about? Well, they were on the feedback group at best. This is the quote from the press release from the NGA. The feedback group will play an advisory role, not a decision-making role in the process. CCSSI retains the final right for all decisions. So as a contrast, you have on the one side the Missouri statute that says the State Board of Education shall constitute the work groups. Common Core, Achieve constituted the work groups. Active classroom teachers shall be the majority of work group members. Instead, you have Achieve staff and a number of consultants, which were test developers, private organizations, authors of educational materials, publishers. And then teachers shall be selected by professional organizations of the state, meaning you needed to be a Missouri person to develop the standards for Missouri. There were no active Missouri teachers on the development committees for Common Core. In that press release, one of the other things that they said was this was a partnership of the National Governors Association and CCSSO. Those are all of the chief education officers in the state, whether they're called the state superintendent or the state commissioner of education. And ACT, the College Board, and Achieve Inc. Those were primarily the people involved in developing the standards. NGA and CCSSO are private trade associations based in Washington, D.C. The work group, the deliberations of the work group will be held confidential throughout the process. Okay, so we don't know what happened in those deliberations. We know who was on the team, but but we don't know what happened. And Sandra Stotsky said in that brief interview there, she said, we hadn't signed a confidentiality agreement. We can't tell anybody. And she said, frankly, we didn't even really know as the validation committee members. And there it is, the feedback group will serve as an advisory. I'm going to look briefly at the standards themselves. Here's the page for the English Language Arts standards. And you'll notice that they are English Language Arts and literacy across subject of history, social studies, science, and other technical subjects. So it's not just English in your English class. It's English now touching all subjects. Ford Institute reviewed the Common Core state standards, the English standards, and they said, first, standards don't properly scaffold skills from grade to grade. For example, quoting from text is arguably easier than paraphrasing, and yet the standards require mastery of paraphrasing first. So the first thing you have kids do is the hardest thing. Second, these standards is also repeated verbatim in the informational text strand. Okay, there's this weird split in informational text and fiction text within Common Core. What they say is in grades K through 8, you should have 50-50 fiction information text. In grades 9 through 12, you should have 30% fiction, 70% nonfiction. Well, this is kind of strange. Where did this weird split come from? Well, this is Diane Ravitch. She's an education historian and a former Assistant Secretary of Education under Bush and Clinton. And she said, I was on the board of the NAEP. That was that test we talked about, that standardized test before, for 7 years. And the proportions were created as a guideline for publishers constructing the assessments, not the teachers. So in order for the assessment developers to figure out the text that they're going to use in the test, they came up with these kind of random standards. She said, there's no valid reason that you would tell teachers that they must tailor and teach to match completely arbitrary ratio inserted into the NAEP. There's zero scientific validation in order to do this. This is Dr. James Milgram. He was in video. He's from Stanford University. He was on the validation committee. He refused to sign off on the Common Core standards. He said, I can tell you the main objection, and the reason he didn't sign off is they don't match up to international expectations. The standards are supposed to be internationally benchmarked and right up there, really high standards. But they put us 2 years behind practices in the high-achieving countries by the 7th grade and require only a partial understanding of Algebra 1. And you don't make that up in the weighted grades. You stay behind. Moreover, they cover very little content of Algebra 2 and none of any of the higher level coursework. They will not help our children match up to students in top foreign countries when it comes to being hired for those top level jobs. And just as an example, you can see here, standard algorithms, they do teach those. When you just line up the numbers and you can carry them and all that kind of stuff. That's standard algorithm. NCTM is the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. They want kids to learn standard algorithms starting in 2nd grade. Common Core doesn't even start until 4th grade. And when you get to division, National Council of Teachers of Mathematics at 5th grade, Common Core says, 6th grade. You can do long division starting in 6th grade. If you want to have the advanced math that you're going to need to do pre-calculus in high school and calculus in high school, which is what you would need to do any of the math level majors in college, you're going to have something outside of Common Core because you won't have the time and you won't have the content under your belt by the time you get through Common Core. And one of the things is this, math standards require the use of strategies for place value, and I'm just going to play this, it's very short, very quick. But this will give you an idea what strategies based on place values means. So here's the problem, just real quickly, the box and some more. This is how kids are taught to solve these problems now. I don't know if you've seen this. They're drawing all of these things. Okay, what she's done, she's got a blackboard full of boxes that she has to then add up and pull all together to do this. It took her 8 minutes to solve that problem. And then her mom said, well, show me how we do this at home. So she lined up the numbers and she added them up in less than a minute. But this is what strategies the kids are being told to use, and the teachers being told to use, because it's written into the standards. Just as an example, this is the lattice math. This is another math concept that they use. This doesn't do you any good later in life. This concept is never used later on in math. They're supposed to be fewer and clearer. We've got Common Core on one side that talks about all of this stuff you're supposed to do area and perimeter and using whole numbers and side lengths and everything. And then a simple standard from Washington State just is to determine the perimeter and area of a rectangle using formulas and explain how you did that. The other group that was not on that development committee was anybody from early childhood education. And this is the thing that concerns me the most, even though I don't have children this age yet. But they wrote a letter, and it was signed by 500 early childhood education experts, and they wrote it to the CCSSI Development Committee. The letter was completely ignored, but it opens up, it says, we have grave concerns about the core standards for young children. The ones that were produced in January, the drafts, conflict with compelling new research in cognitive science, neuroscience, and child development, early childhood education about how young children learn. The standards ask the kids in the very young grades to do things that their minds just simply are not yet ready to fully understand. And as an example, I point to the thing there on the bottom, the kindergarten English language arts standard says, recount stories including fables, folktales, and myths from diverse cultures, determine the central message or lesson, and explain how it is conveyed through key details in the text. This is a 5-year-old, an emerging reader, and this is what they're supposed to do. Now, you could probably get a kid to do the story of the boy who cried wolf, but you would have to work really long and really hard to get these kids to do it, when they could be developing other skills that are age appropriate. So there are kindergarten teachers out there saying, I can get my kids to see vertices on triangles. I'm like, great, but can they tell you, all the colors? Well, no, we skip those. So the standards actually came from this American diploma project, which Achieve Inc., who was very involved, did. Now this Achieve Inc. was founded by the National Governors Association along with Educational Trust, Fordham Institute, and they did the American Diploma Project to identify the must-have knowledge and skills demanded by higher education and employers. And in fact, Michael Cohen, who was the president of Achieve Inc., testified in New York, and he said, this work provided the foundation for the development of Common Core state standards. So what they did was they went into 5 states. They didn't talk to teachers, they didn't talk to college professors, they went and looked at businesses, and they saw what businesses had the most growth potential, what job sectors were going to be opening up in the future. And then they went back and they mined the transcripts of people in those businesses to see what courses they had taken, and said, okay, well, these are the skill sets that you need to know to be successful in the future, because we've decided these are the jobs that are available. So here you can see those 5 states that were analyzed in red. Missouri was not one of them, so our business sector was not considered in this. And then several states afterwards took the standards that they developed out of the American Diploma Project and began trying to work them into their state standards. Again, Missouri was not one of those states. This is David Coleman. He's the president of Student Achievement Partners, part of Achieve Inc. He was the chief architect of the English language arts standards. He's never worked in a classroom in his life. He has never written a standard in his life, but he was on the development team, and this is what he said about the team of people who were involved in writing the standards.
Achievement Partners. Student Achievement Partners, all you need to know about us are a couple of things. One is we're composed of that collection of unqualified people who were involved in developing the common standards. And our only qualification was our attention to and command of the evidence behind them.
The evidence he's talking about is that economic analysis of business sectors, not the evidence of does this kind of standard work in the classroom. So the deliberations were confidential throughout the process. Why is that? Here's why. It's a copyrighted product owned by these 2 trade associations. Okay? We can't change it. There is no process for changing it. It is owned by private industry. You, the taxpayer, have no say in it anymore, but you're paying for your kids to do it. And one of the other things you need to know about standards is, this is ITL research. They looked at standards and they looked at education practices in a number of countries. And one of the things they discovered was the ceiling effect, and said while students are likely to reach up to the level demanded by the learning activity, they're unlikely to go beyond it. This is very critical because while they tell us that Common Core is, very high standards, we're expecting great things out of our kids. This is what Commissioner Castro testified last summer to the House Interim Committee on Common Core standards.
I think that the only thing we can say to that is that the Common Core standards are certainly not, as Mike pointed out, they're simply the floor.
They're just the floor. They're not the high international standards, they're the floor. And they're the floor, and yet they're a floor that says the states that adopt the Common Core standards can supplement the standards with additional standards, provided that those additional standards do not exceed 15% of the state's total standards for that content area. So if they're the floor, they take up 85% of the room that we have to develop standards. So we get 15% that we can add to it. An educational experiment. I'm gonna skip this video, but this is Chester Finn who's saying, Common Core, we don't really know what we're doing, we're implementing it in 46 states, and it's kind of like building a plane while you're flying it. And Michael Cohen, president of Achieve, again, in his testimony to New York, said the full effects of Common Core won't be seen until an entire cohort of students from kindergarten through high school has been effectively exposed to Common Core teaching. So we don't know, we're hoping this works, but we don't really know until we, ruin one generation. Remember I said this was a convergence of two goals. So the first goal is to develop a human resource department where we make sure the kids are prepared for jobs, and we've already predetermined which jobs those are going to be. The second thing that's happening is this division between independent source suppliers and established companies like Pearson. Pearson is the largest education supplier company in the world. They do textbooks, they do lesson plans, they do teacher evaluations, assessments, they do it all. And what they found out was that with the development of the internet and publishing via the internet, the previous barriers to entering the world of providing educational text had been removed. And there were a lot of open source suppliers who really were just concerned about education, who were putting their material out there for free. Well, that became a serious competition for these big companies like Pearson who wanted you to buy their products. So big publishers were starting to lose sales to the open source competitors. So those guys got together and they figured out that they could create computer adaptive software key to student responses in databases that they alone had access to. No open source providers would be admitted. They could also team up with tablet producers and sell district tablets. Anybody district, let's see, how many are in the Kirkwood district here? Okay, okay, they gave everybody iPads, right? Preloaded with apps and things like that, and locked to prevent access to other publishers' materials. They're using the public system to gain market share for themselves. Money. There's big profit potential in education. It's a $500 billion a year industry. The private equity and capital venture is looking for places to invest their money to make a profit by taking over broad swaths of public education. They want to use computers. Computers are going to have a big role in education. Eva Baker of the Center for Study of Evaluation said that computers are going to be a big part of education in the future. It's going to be less expensive than doing professional development. So all you teachers out there that think that, well, this is a great job, well, it's going to be cheaper to replace you with a computer. In the years, 80% of the teachers aren't even going to know anything except having a computer in the classroom doing a lot of it. And companies are looking to develop software that can replace teachers for segments of the school day, driving down the labor costs. 80 to 85% of your school district's annual budget is salary. It's a service that you're providing. The only way to drive down that cost is to find some way to replace people. Bill Gates knows an experiment. He said it'd be great if our tech education stuff worked, but that we probably won't know for decades. Thank you, Bill. Why does Bill Gates want Common Core so badly? Money. He says it goes so well.
In terms of standards, the state-led Common Core State Standards Initiative is developing clear, rigorous standards that will match the best in the world. Last month, 46 governors and chief state school officers made a public commitment to embrace those standards. This is encouraging, but identifying common standards is just the starting point. We'll only know if this effort has succeeded when the curriculum and tests are aligned to these standards. When the tests are aligned to the common standards, the curriculum will line up as well. And it will unleash a powerful market of people providing services for better teaching. For the first time, there'll be a large uniform base of customers looking at using products that can help every kid learn and every teacher get better.
So he said two things there. When the curriculum aligns with the standards and the assessments align to the standards, you'll have complete alignment, which means that the standards will not be driving anymore. The test will be driving the curriculum. So all of this free, you can choose whatever curriculum you want, is a phantom, because as soon as the tests come out and you figure out what they're testing, you're going to teach what they're testing. If it's not being assessed, you're not going to teach it. You have limited resources. Your funding is very tight in education. So the tests will drive it. Who was sitting at the table to write the standards? The test developers, the ACT, the College Board, Achieving. Pearson, are all at the table to write the standards because they're ready to give you the test, and conveniently, they're ready to give you all of the curriculum materials as well. And the other thing he said was the benefit here, the big benefit is that we'll have a uniform customer. So we won't have to change our product, we will change the customer by making all of you want the same thing. You don't have to say in it anymore. This is private industry taking over government, using government to create a market share for themselves. And at this point, with CCSSI developing the standards and all of the money and political influence that was behind this, whoever's going to develop another set of competing standards? Nobody is. So we better like this system because we're going to be permanently locked into it. I'm going to stop at this point. I'm going to let Gretchen talk to you about the testing that's going on now and possibly opting out of it.
Yes, and then we'll have some time for question and answer, Mike. I'm not going to talk that long. I am Gretchen Logue. I do live in Glendale. I have been talking about Common Core for about 4 years. I have a 25-year-old son who has a cochlear implant, so that's why I got interested in Common Core, because the word common doesn't apply to special needs kids. It doesn't even really apply to, quote, average kid, whatever an average kid is. But for special needs kids, I was very concerned because I knew when he was 6 years old, he had very specific needs that a hearing 6-year-old did not have. He needed to learn in a different way, and that was okay, and he was able to catch up. But in a Common Core system, that's not going to be able to happen for these kids. And also, special needs really wasn't addressed very well in the Common Core state standards. They were an afterthought. I think if we have a chance to get rid of the standards, it's going to be with the special needs, because they are in violation of IDEA, which is the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. They're going to have a terrible time trying to marry IDEA with Common Core state standards. There's been some chatter that I've heard the last few months that there may be a class action suit coming up. We can only hope. One of the things that Ann talked about that's really difficult, I think, for people to wrap their heads around is the data retrieval. One of the 4 assurances that you had to sign on to for the state's stabilization funding was to ramp up your data systems. Your data systems now, the whole idea, if you have a common set of standards for every state, then each state computer can talk to each state because you're dealing with common data elements. And also with Artie Duncan tweaking the FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights Privacy Act, your students' data now will be individual. It will be specific to that child. So personal information, which was aggregate before, which was masked, you couldn't tell what student was being tracked or what student's data was. It will now be individualized to a teacher, and this information can be accessed by other federal agencies, other state agencies, and third-party researchers that the Department of Education deems needs that information. A lot of it is information for product development. So your kid's information is being used for product development for a private product, and you didn't even know it, did you? You didn't give your permission to do that. So the data is so difficult to talk about because you can't really see it. You don't know where it's going, and you don't know who's taking it, what it's being used for. Well, I was one of the lucky ones. I saw in the Kirkwood-Webster Times that we had a lot of IRS information being stolen, right? And a lot of police reports. Well, I get a call from our accountant on Monday and says, I've been trying to do y'all's tax return and it keeps kicking back, and it's your number. So I came up and I filed a police report, and I said, how many people have you taken police reports from in Glendale? Because I saw it in the paper. And he said, 50 or 60. Do you know that's 10% of what our population here is in Glendale? So now where's my who has my social security number? What's it being used for? I don't know. But your kids, that's what's going to be happening with this information that they're accessing through the computers, through the iPads that Kirkwood bought, and you don't know it because it never comes home, and you can't see the assessments, so you don't know what they're being asked. you don't know where that information is being given to, who it's being given to. You can sign to say, I don't want my child to be taking online tests, but the Missouri State Board Association, for most of the school districts, and Kirkwood is one of them, there's a little disclaimer in there that says if the parent doesn't give permission, well, the superintendent or the principal or a designee can allow the child on the computer. So regardless, if you have said, I do not want my child to do this, it can be overridden at the school district level. And that is a Missouri State Board Association policy. That is also a private organization that our tax money is being funneled into. That's just, that's kind of on a local level. I wanted to talk to you about this one email about a mother who has a special needs child. And she sent this to another gal in the state. She wanted to opt her child out of this behavioral testing. Part of Common Core, it's not just academic testing. A lot of it is behavioral. So your child, and I'm thinking about, because I have 2 boys, I'm thinking about a 5-year-old boy in a kindergarten class, which could be a disaster, right? your kid, I mean, he's a boy. I'm making generalizations, but boys like to get up, move around, like to touch a lot. Girls tend to be a little bit more, compliant. But they will be graded subjectively on, does the child make good eye contact? Does the child attend well? Sometimes you're asking teachers now to make judgments that they're not trained to do. They're kind of doing a psychological or subjective, but that's going into their behavioral assessments. So I just wanted to read it real quick. I found your post on Pearson Corporation Common Core testing quite interesting. I'm a mother who had concerns about a psychological assessment given inappropriately to my child. She had asked that it not be given to her child, but it was. I contacted Pearson, and Pearson representatives informed me that any testing material touting the Pearson name are under strict copyright laws, and I cannot view them in any form. If I am found guilty of viewing any testing materials in any form, not only myself but those responsible for that material will be subject to penalties for copyright violations, which in Pearson's case, in my opinion, are quite strong. They were incredibly adamant and forceful in telling me that I was strictly prohibited no matter the circumstances. I would post this publicly, but last week I was called into my district superintendent's office to be berated and labeled anti-school for posts I have made on my personal private page. I'm considering my options, but won't be silenced for long. Thank you for your hard work in spreading the information that you do. And we're seeing this over and over and over again, where it doesn't matter what the parents want. The superintendent or the principal is going to say, this is what you have to do. We're having lots of stories come in the last several days. Parents are trying to opt their child out of the testing. The testing is 10 days long. Now, it's not 10 days all day, but it might be 2 hours one day, an hour and a half the next day. And these parents are saying, I don't want my child to take the test, because the test really doesn't count for the child. The test counts for the school, but it's not going to make or break the child's, whether the child is going to be retained or not. So it's just for the school's ranking and for the federal government, and do we need money, you're going to get your money that you're supposed to get, la-di-da-di-da-di-da. It's nothing to do with the child. We don't know this for a fact, but we're hearing the same wording come across. A lot of the school districts are saying you cannot, if you want to opt your child out, you have to take them out for the full 10 days. If they are on school district property, they will be charged with insubordination. They will be trespassing. Parents have said, I'll come get my child for that testing window because I want them to be educated the rest of the day, and these parents have been told no. Well, the issue with that is because of the Missouri School Improvement Plan by DESE, if a child misses a certain number of days in a period, they can be charged with truancy. and they will be turned over to Division of Family Services. So the parents are in a bind, but some of these parents are willing to fight. And some of these parents are saying, I will get a lawyer, you cannot do this. There is no statute saying that you can do this to my child. But this is where we are in Missouri, and it's gonna get worse. Next year, we're gonna have the full-blown testing, and I would think that we'll probably have more parents trying to opt out. And I don't know what's gonna be ahead. But that's public education today. It's not a pretty sight. The assessments, real quick, I just want to go over. New Hampshire teachers, they did a practice test for Smarter Balance, which is our consortia, in December. They wrote about it, and they had nothing good to say about the test. They said they were inappropriate, that the children would fail it. They didn't know why these tests were being given to children. It was a disaster. That's the writing on the wall for us. When we get the full-blown assessments next year, I doubt they're going to be tweaked that much, but we're probably going to be having the same, it's the same consortium, it's the same test. We testified, we all testified in Jefferson City just last month, I guess it was, and I testified to this, and I said, we're the show me state, and we're being shown by these other states what's ahead of us, and we don't have to do this. And your legislators didn't vote for it. They didn't even really know about it. So we're hoping with the legislation that we have, it's not as strong as we had hoped, but we're a lot farther along this year than we were this time last year. And I believe that if we keep chipping away with this, trying to, basically what we want to tell people is, look, it's like Ann said, your public education is now being controlled by private corporations that you are compelled to pay for with your taxes. And if you send your children, that they want your money and your children, and then they want you to stay away. Mm-hmm. And it really concerns me that everything is copyrighted, everything is secret. Standards have never been copyrighted before. They've always been in the public domain. It's public education. But now you're dealing with corporations that have no voter accountability. Mm-hmm. And no legislative oversight. So they're accountable to nobody. So you're paying into a system in which you truly have no voice. So I think that kind of wraps up where I am. Anne, would you like to come up here? And we can take any questions that anybody has about Common Core. Yes.
What are these assessment tests called? How would we know that they're being tested with these assessments? What are they called? Assessment testing? Is there a name for it?
Well, these will replace the MAP test. So currently, once, in April, the kids always take the MAP test.
And that's Missouri assessment.
Right. That test is going away. It will be the new SBAC, which is the acronym for Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortia. But we've already seen memos coming out of DESE saying that they're going to just call it the MAP test next year. So it'll be SBAC. You'll know it because it'll be online. All of these tests are done online, which is another financial burden for the districts to come up with the computers and the broadband and everything to do that.
And then there's some.
It should be the only test next year.
And then there's some question where some of the schools now are giving the SBAC test, but they're calling it MAP. Some of them are piloting the test. It's a test of the test because the test isn't even valid. So they're just testing the test to see if the test is going to be valid for next year.
Now, I'm from New York, so I'm new to Missouri. We have Iowa tests. Are there Iowa tests given to the kids here?
Iowa basic test.
Iowa basic schools
I
test.
think the private schools.
Private schools
For very
do.
clean piece, I think they still do that.
Okay. Right.
But I don't know how Common Core will be implemented.
What can people do to help move the legislation along?
Okay, so we have a couple of bills that are working their way through the legislature. HB 1490, which is Kurt Barr's bill in the House. It's probably the farthest along of any of them. It was voted out of the House 132 to 19, which is, when you consider we have 109 Republicans, that's pretty good. This is not a partisan issue. There are Democrats that don't like this. There are liberals that don't like this. There are conservatives, Republicans. So that has gone through a Senate hearing. We voted out of the Senate Education Committee, and now will go on the Senate floor. We have similar legislation that's really more of our language, which is Senate Bill 798. Senator Ed Emery is carrying that one. So those two bills, we're not quite sure how it's going to work out on the floor, but they will be on the Senate calendar approximately the same time. We have a second bill, second set of bills, talking about student data, and I have information on that, but just for the purposes of time tonight, I didn't get real heavily into the data, but we have virtually no protection on student data. They keep saying, they refer blankly to state and federal privacy laws, so there really aren't many. And so we put together a bill that started to put a framework around, well, what is private? And so we said, personally identifiable information is the stuff we're trying to protect. Can't do anything about the aggregate, not going to touch the 61 data points that the state currently collects on kids for federal accountability purposes, but anything new that might come down the pike, if it's personally identifiable, you have to, it's about transparency and informed consent. So the parents have to know and have to give their consent to collect that, because once you collect it, you can't really protect it. There's no such thing as a secure database, so the parents need to know who has what.
Should people call their legislators?
They need to call their legislators, especially because Senator Pierce, who's the chairman of the Education Committee, also has a bill moving through that combines both Common Core and student data, and it's the worst of both possible worlds. It's SB 815, and it's got to go down. It gives full control of setting student data protection to DESE, who has agreements with other departments in the state to share data, so they have a conflict of interest in trying to protect the data. And on the Common Core side, he said the bill calls for a review committee to look at standards again, and it's totally politicized. It has a bunch of legislators on it and a bunch of
Can I ask you, whenever something comes up, to send it to me, and then I can send it to the people so they can do something if they
Sure.
wish to?
And should I put the cards out? We have some brochures back there with the websites on it, but moagainstcommoncore.com is our website, and that website is primarily dedicated to either research or to the legislative activity. The Missouri Education Watchdog is the blog that's got more of the daily news, so that the reports on there change daily. The coalition site kind of changes as things are changing in the legislature. And if you go there and you sign up there on that, join that mailing list, you will get notices from us when there's actions that are needed. If we need witness forms, or if we need you to call your senators or your representatives, that's primarily how we do the legislative side of things.
You got it.
You're first and then you.
This week's Time Magazine has a one-page really good article on Common Core, and it's called Common Core Test Spark Parent Revolt, and it talks about how both sides of the political aisle are finding great concern with it, but it's really a groundswell of parent movement that's crushing it. And they talk specifically about New York State, where up to 60% of the parents in a lot of the districts have opted out of the testing. And school districts aren't even trying to punish or discipline the families because it's so overwhelming, the people who are revolting. And they talk about other states, there's up to a dozen states now where they're using that tactic, the opt-out tactic parents are using to try to bring it down, so.
And that's what we
Great
need.
idea.
That's what we need.
Yeah, you know, DESE speaks out of both sides of their mouth. They say, oh, well, districts can do what they want, they can adopt their own standards, they can develop their own curriculum, but on the other side, we have the Missouri School Improvement Plan, which is how you determine a district's accreditation. And a certain number of points are going to be, 40 out of 140 points are allocated for your student test grades. So if you don't align your curriculum to Common Core, then you're not going to do well on the test, you're going to lose a lot of points. If you don't have 95% of your kids taking the test, you're going to lose points. If you don't have 90% of your kids attending 90% of the time, you're going to lose points. And so that's the hammer that they're using to enforce all of this. If you had a question.
Yeah, I want to thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for inviting me. I saw the blurb in the Webster Kirkwood Times. I would like to invite you all to the Jefferson Township Democratic Club meeting next Tuesday night at the Webster Roads Library at 7 o'clock. And our guest speaker is going to be Dr. Sarah Riss, who's the superintendent of schools in Webster Grove School District. And her topic is to be on all of those items that are being discussed in Jefferson City that have an impact in Webster Groves, and I think this is probably one of them. So if you'd like to hear perhaps a different, pardon the word, spin, but I think that there is a spin here. But I also think that you're right when you say that there's problems that the left and the right have with some of the Common Core, how it was developed, the content, how it's going to be used, and things like that. But they go beyond the Common Core. Some of those concerns existed already with, as you mentioned, some of the MSIP and things that have been going on for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, we'd like to help, you know, the districts and the superintendents as much as possible. And in fact, when they made several amendments to 1490, and one of them was to relieve some of the pressure of MSIP. So they said, all right, well, we'll give the test next year, but there won't be any consequences for scores. So that was at least one relief valve that got pulled.
And all the special education students, they have to take the same test every other child in their grade test. It cannot be lowered. No one can read it to them. They can't get any accommodations except maybe extra time. Sometimes that is it. That is the only accommodation, or they can type instead of write. And that's one thing. But also the fact that we can't see any of these test questions, including teachers, makes me very suspicious, because I teach school and I teach a computerized curriculum that comes from a nationalized company. And a lot of times I see that the questions they ask the children are intentionally vague, and the child could easily give the wrong answer, but it can also seem like the right answer. And they can have two answers that could be right. So because we can't see these, then they get graded. So now they have another thing. They want to bring in, I believe, charter schools. They want to dismantle public education or funnel our money into private schools. So then now they can justify that by saying our test scores are low. And we have absolutely no defense.
You're giving tests that the teachers don't create, Missouri doesn't create, school district doesn't create, and yet the teachers are going to be evaluated on these assessments. And if a child is in a bad mood that day and answers, I don't know, does that make the teacher a bad teacher?
We already had a teacher commit suicide in Los Angeles because those scores were published. And he was a very hardworking, loving teacher in elementary school. Killed himself. Yes, this is what's, and they're putting our pay associated with those tests.
Yes, they are.
And one of the Liberty groups around town has been trying to get somebody to take the other side in an open debate. And they've asked and asked around, but no one will come to debate for Common Core. So maybe if you know someone who might, that would be helpful, because they really don't have an open public debate. And the other thing is, I don't know, I was late, but if you showed that video where the people themselves, when they were testifying in DC, told the governing bodies, this is the bottom, this is not a raised level of standard. They themselves said this is the bottom.
One thing that I did forget to mention, that I've been working on this article for a while, but I haven't gotten it done yet, is there's a report that came out from the National School Board Association just recently, and it said that school boards need to hire chief privacy officers and attorneys, because the data, any data breach is going to be a liability for your school district. So that's going to be a budget item that your school board members probably don't know about yet, but that's a whole nother issue. The voters, I mean, they didn't vote for this, but yet it's being mandated that they need to do this. That's going to be a very sticky area, I think, for school districts, and it's going to be a huge liability issue. I did disagree.
It was really interesting. I was in a Common Core meeting, well, it was open meeting for Common Core, you could speak for it or against it, in Springfield area, in Missouri. And the issue of security was presented by some security expert. He's with the government, he's not with, but he's working with the government. He spoke against the difficulties that Common Core is presenting. It's already because there are some schools in southwest Missouri that have actually adopted, they are more or less the flagship schools to iron out all the problems. It's already been breached twice. And the solution to the problem was not to tell anybody.
Yeah.
And to leave it alone. And they said, what, somebody asked what would happen to that information. And they said they sell it internationally. So the real problem also is ongoing, because if your child's identity, because there's a social security and a name, and that's all you need to sell identity. So it's sold in a foreign country for at least $127. And in the international market, you've got 5 million of those, which is realistic. Then you've made a huge amount of money. But you will sell, that will be sold, our children's identity will be sold on the foreign market. For 18 years, you might not know about it. You go then to open a bank account, you find out that lo and behold, you're in debt.
You have bad credit already.
Your child is in debt, you have bad credit
I think
already.
I just wrote an article about that yesterday, and I think they said already 140,000 kindergartners have been
That's exactly
compromised.
And folks, all of this is to develop products to, quote, help the teachers understand what their students need. I have not yet met a single teacher who said, I have no idea what my kids need. They, in a week after school starts, they know who's got what good skills, who needs help in their math, what problems there are at home. They don't need this. So we're collecting all of this for teachers that don't need it.
I've also read articles and seen documentation that eventually it's going to be made illegal for parents to homeschool. They will be treated as criminals. There is also a correlation for the New World Government that's coming down the road. And they're also being connected somehow through the jihadist movement in our nation.
There's
It's
all kinds of
sinister.
possibilities that could come out of this.
Sinister.
Would you like to say something about the issue of cheating? In the past, we have always had cheating done by some students. In this program, we have cheating done by teachers, by counselors, by principals, and superintendents.
And you know why people cheat? Because you have put everything on those student test scores. You made them the thing you live and die by. And they don't help the students and they don't help the teachers. But now you've created the incentive that everybody wants to cheat because you've got to get those scores up.
Can you just touch lightly on how it's impacting the private schools and the parochial schools? And, you know, just, because I think a lot of people are unclear, you know.
Yeah, Missouri has the most liberal homeschool laws of any of the states. Missouri is very good in terms of how we treat our homeschoolers for right now. And again, Common Core is not the law. No Child Left Behind is still the law of the land. Common Core is a regulatory process with incentivized through money. Private schools don't have to adopt Common Core, but several of the Catholic schools are. And in fact, I'd gone in and talked to Dr. Tickey, who's the curriculum director for the St. Louis Archdiocese, and she said, I read through Common Core, I think it's wonderful, we're gonna use the parts that we like. We can't get an answer out of the diocese, what are the parts you like? And I will say, there are good parts of Common Core. They're great parts, but in a public education system, teachers should have the flexibility to use the parts that work for them and for their students. And if they don't work for your demographics, then you do something different over here. Several letters have been written. We have a gentleman, Ron Ryder, who is a diehard on this, and he continues to contact the bishops and the deacons and the archbishops. And I have some pieces out there on the table that deal specifically with what's happening with Common Core in the Catholic Church. So I encourage you all to look at those because I don't have a child in the Catholic school, so I can't address it terribly. The hook for private schools and homeschoolers with Common Core is now the college boards, because they're on the writing committee, are going to align to Common Core. And we don't know what that's going to look like yet. We're starting to have some hints coming out of the SAT as to what that might look like for them. But you know, there's lots of colleges that don't use those tests, and I keep looking at the homeschool community saying, why don't you write your own? You guys would do so much better at it anyway. So but that is the hook, and the fact that as Bill Gates said, they've created a single customer. Everybody is aligning to that single customer, which means every single education supplier now is trying to get that stamp, that aligned to Common Core stamp on their books, which means if you're in private school, you won't be able to find books, textbooks that aren't aligned to Common Core. That's how they're going to pull everybody into this. All right, well, I thank you all for coming, and we'll hang around for a little while if you have any other questions.
Thank you, ladies. There's a lot of information to absorb. But like I said, if you have anything to communicate, send it to me and I'll send it out to everybody.
Okay.
If you left your email, you're all gonna get it. We have 2 more speakers, just very short. Dr. Helen Galahad is going to talk about an initiative that is growing up in Missouri. It's the Center for Self-Governance. Helen, you have 5 minutes.
I'm Dr. Helen Galahad. I'm an internist by trade. I adore my patients, but I'm a lover of liberty, and that's why I'm here. Just like the previous 2 ladies who spoke, it's a passion for all of us. And mine isn't so specific as to Common Core, but I will tell you to pay attention to who voted and who was absent. Remember, if you're not for us, you're against us. And on this last Common Core vote from your state reps, the Capitol. So what I'm here to tell you about is specifically the Center for Self-Governance. This is my fancy high-tech slide. And the key to self-governance, when I first learned about it, really in April of this past year, this is a person self-governing, and it's equally balanced with central governance from the federal government. This is what it should maybe look like, but it's usually not like that. So we are here to inform people with a hands-on is what we do on exactly how to keep that balance. Our Missouri Constitution specifically states that all political power, does anybody know Article 1, Section 1 of the Missouri Constitution, no fair freedom? Anybody? Belongs to the people. Yes, sir, in the front row. You're right. So is vested in the people, all the power. So who here is in charge of their local school boards? Anybody after these elections? No. How about your state or your Senate district? No.
We have a candidate here for Senate district.
All right. That's a great first start. Well, generally people aren't, and in fact, we're really, myself included, have always been so ignorant. We don't even know when we call or we email what we're doing even has an effect. So what we do is we teach normal students, and we have a lot of people who've run and have taken our class who are now running for offices, and some even statewide. So what I would say is what you think goes on in Jeff City and in our capital doesn't necessarily pan out that way. We teach people what really goes on behind the scenes, because most of us are pretty clueless. We're pretty green, and we're all kind of fat, dumb, and happy about, oh, we do this, and the vote goes here, and then we pass it. It's not really like that so much. So we teach people how to wield their own power and their self-governance. The lady who was an older lady after the Constitutional Convention who confronted Benjamin Franklin and said, Miss Dr. Franklin, what have you given us? A monarchy or republic? And he said, Diane?
A republic, ma'am.
If
you can make
If you can keep it. And this is a woman who couldn't vote, she couldn't hold office, she couldn't have property, she couldn't do anything, but she knew how to wield her influence. In fact, her name is Elizabeth Powell, and she was the one person who single-handedly caused George Washington to run a second term. He was not going to, but she said, if you don't, that will be a signal to the Brits that this experiment has failed. You have to run. And so, at Mrs. Powell's urging, who was a nobody, which is how we all feel sometimes, he ran. And she did wield her power, and she did leverage her self-governance. And again, that's exactly what we teach you to do in class, hands-on. So if you're excited like I was after my first class, I had my state rep at my kitchen table, and then I had my senator. First I had my senator in my office. And people said, "You really did that?" And I said, "Well, I didn't know that you couldn't," but people thought that was really abnormal, but I was just so excited going Mach 2 with my hair on fire after one little class. So that's what we did. But what we want to impress upon you is that our results are amazing. We've been 100% effective on local levels where we have it together and we do network and work together as a team. And I see some folks out there tonight who've already had the training and some who are basically done. And so on a state level, we've been 80% effective, which is really nothing to thumb your nose at. A state level, 80% effective. On the federal level, only 20% effective. What can I say? The federal government, and we're only in 18 states right now. So we're a very young organization. We run on a shoestring. But I just want to leave you with this thought. It doesn't take a majority to prevail. And we've all seen that with some of these agendas that are coming through and affecting all of our lives. Some of the fascist agendas, I call them. It doesn't take a majority, but it takes an untiring and irate minority who is willing to prevail, to succeed in something. So if anybody's heard of the cattle rancher out in Nevada, and the cattle battle going on. That's actually self-governance film that was taken because we teach out there, and that you've seen on some of the news outlets, because nobody else caught it, so it's self-governance's video. We got credit for it, but there's a gentleman coming Friday evening to speak for 1 hour with an account on that with the footage. And actually, we're flying him in this weekend to teach a training course on self-governance for anyone who's interested and actually does want to take the bull by the horns. Thank you so much for your time.
It's Friday night. Where is it?
It's at Half Bible Travel Church on Craig Road. The flyer's back there. It's got some cows on it. And this one with the seesaw is the one for the training class on Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. And now we have Gina Jacksetti. She is running for the 90th district. She had another engagement early this evening, so she's just come by to say hello to us, and we will have her back.
Thanks, Frida. I appreciate the opportunity to speak at least a few minutes to you all. I was actually at tonight the Kirkwood City Council swore in our newest council members. Again, my name is Gina Jacksetti. I grew up in Kirkwood and ultimately went to school at Vanderbilt and lived in Tennessee for 20 years. I graduated from the School of Nursing at Vanderbilt, worked there, started up a home care program for Vanderbilt, and spent a big portion of my nursing career doing home care. My husband and I married, adopted 3 children from Russia, decided I needed to find a nice community to raise them in, and family, lots of family around me, and moved back to Kirkwood. And I moved back in 2002 and settled in with my family and kind of assimilated my children into the school system and into the American life, and then had a chance to go to work for a specialty pharmacy. So I have worked for a specialty pharmacy up in our city since around 2004. And actually, because I didn't think I had enough to do, I guess, I ran for city council and won my first election in 2008 and was reelected in 2012. So I'm in my second term of my city council. So I have many years of healthcare experience, very interested in some of the data issues and some of the data breaches. Those of us in healthcare right now are facing just, so many different regulations. around the HIPAA privacy world and the regulatory things you have to meet around privacy. And then if there's a breach, you have to report it, you have to track it. And then at some point, not only are you facing the liability from, a breach, intentional or not, but you're also facing significant federal fines. It's kind of an interesting program that when you have a breach, you get to report it back to the federal government so they can decide at what point they come in and take all your money. So the data issue and the breaches and the tracking, pretty soon our school districts no doubt will be facing very similar challenges that every healthcare professional in this country is struggling with. And a lot of those kind of regulations just hit us full-fledged last fall. But again, so I'm on city council. I have my 3 children. I have one that's moved out of the house. I have one that's a senior at Vianney, and I have one that's a freshman at Kirkwood High School. And actually, the Kirkwood School District was great as we brought our kids into the Kirkwood School District and had support from the ESL program. And now they all kind of got to go where was the best for them. My experience at the city council level has been great. I've really enjoyed working within Kirkwood's political world, and didn't really have the state rep race on my target list, but Rick String, who is our current rep, has turned out and is moving on to his new biggest challenge. And so Rick and Eric both made contact, and Mike Gibbons and many other really fine community leaders kind of circled the wagons and asked me to step up and run. So I'm in it, minute to minute. And we'll be circling back through, and if you have questions, you can go ahead and come back. Yeah, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
We have another guest that just popped up, Rich Holman. He's going to briefly talk about an issue that he's concerned about.
I'm a latecomer. I apologize for the late notice, but I got to tell you something that I'm pretty excited about. I'm one of these guys that's kind of in the background, and whenever Rich talks or somebody talks, like the lady from Centers for Self-Governance, I go, yay, good job. But I'm onto something now that I'm all in. And I'm asking you guys to at least take a look at what I've got here. Anybody heard of Convention of States? Yes?
Yes.
Let me just see some hands. Okay, good. So not a lot of you. That's good. I'm going to pass some cards around. If you would just kind of take one, go take a look at conventionofstates.com and just look at a few things that are on there. And I was just listening to this lady talk about the Centers for Self-Governance, and I thought, man, with their knowledge and experience, what a great way to get something like this that's growing with the grassroots from the bottom up, being able to actually do something about our out-of-control federal government. I personally believe this may be the one thing that we can do. 34 states got to get together. They have to pass this in order to have a convention. You have the convention. You come out of that with these amendments, hopefully, that say you will balance the dadgum budget. You will have term limits. And I'm telling you, I was so impressed with all of this. I got to go to Jeff City to attend the General Laws Committee, and where they brought this up in the House of Representatives. It was really exciting for me to be able to be there. The people that showed up filled the room for the Convention of States list. The agenda items, there were like 18 agenda items on there. They asked us all to leave. There were 35 of us approximately. They asked us to leave the room so the other people could at least get in to do their agenda items. And if we can keep that kind of momentum going, and I'm not going to take up your time, but I would ask you just one thing. Go on to the Convention of States, look at some of the stuff that's on there, look at a few of the videos, and you'll probably go, yeah, I think that might do it. Is it gonna happen tomorrow? Nope. But 2, maybe 3 years, because this is our last chance, folks.
Yes.
This is my opinion, it's our last chance. If we don't bring the federal government under control, and anybody in here tell me that the politicians up in Washington will do it,
No.
I'm gonna tell you, you're smoking something, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, I'm coming out of the woodwork, I'm all in. Anybody has any questions, by all means, please talk to me. I appreciate your time. Sorry for the last minute thing here, but when I talk to Ann Wagner, when I talk to any of them, I talk Convention of States. Do you support it? I want you to support it. Now, that's sometimes depends on what politician you get. You may be talking to the Fox's Garden Hen House, and they say, yeah, oh yeah, I'm all for it, but you know good well it's not true. So anyway, thanks for your time.
Well, thank
Hopefully we'll get that through the Missouri legislature before too long.
Well, I think we had a full program tonight, so have a few snacks in the back and talk some more amongst yourselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. Thanks.